In a quiet Austin suburb where the Texas sun paints golden streaks on manicured lawns, Eleanor Winters stood in her kitchen slicing bell peppers with practiced precision. In her 60s, she moved with the grace of someone a dozen years younger, the result of 20 years of yoga practice and a lifetime spent with care. Her honey blonde hair, which was trimmed every 6 weeks at Bella's salon, fell in soft waves over a face favored by time. People often mistook her for 40, a compliment she accepted with a practiced smile that never left her eyes. Eleanor Dale's husband, Eleanor Dale, created Winters Construction from nothing. That's what he liked to tell anyone who would listen. Impressed business associates never heard how Eleanor's father gave them the 5 acres of commercial real estate where Dale's headquarters now stood, and how her family connections secured the first important contracts when they were newlyweds with an infant in their arms. For 28 years she'd stood in his shadow, the perfect contractor's wife, smiling at the right moments, throwing the right parties, never contradicting him in public. Their daughter Jenny followed in her footsteps, marrying Tom Caldwell, an ambitious project manager at Dale's company. Tom had Dale's approval from day one. Hard-working, charismatic, eager to please his boss. The perfect son-in-law on paper. Eleanor had noticed similarities between Tom and the younger Dale, but kept those observations to herself, hoping Jenny's marriage would be somehow different from her own. Then came the first text message that arrived on Eleanor's phone, well past midnight 3 weeks ago. "Eleanor, are you awake? I need to talk to someone." She should have ignored it. Instead, she responded. Tom confessed that he was unhappy with Jenny, that there was a spark missing in their marriage, that Jenny doesn't understand the pressures he faces at work. At first, Eleanor tried to help him with advice, offering the wisdom of someone who had been through the difficult waters of a long marriage. She offered date nights, communication strategies, even marriage counseling. But gradually the tone of Tom's messages changed. "You look amazing in the blue dress you wore to the company picnic," he wrote one evening. "Jenny doesn't groom herself the way you do." Another time, "You understand me better than anyone else. I've always admired you." Eleanor recognized a pattern. Men like Dale and Tom thought women her age were invisible unless they needed something, or saw an opportunity. They assumed that women after 50 were desperate for male attention and willing to risk everything for a few honeyed words. They underestimated women like Eleanor, who had spent decades watching, learning, and slowly building their own power. Tom didn't realize that Eleanor had been planning her exit from her marriage for nearly 2 years. The separate bank account she opened after inheriting from her mother. The small lakeside cottage she purchased through a friend and was slowly renovating, explaining her absences as charity work. A consulting business she'd created using her extensive connections in the construction industry, operating under her maiden name. When Tom's messages became more explicit, suggesting they meet somewhere private to talk, Eleanor made a decision. She would not be the villain in her daughter's story. She will not give Dale the opportunity to portray her as an unfaithful wife. Instead, she will use Tom's indiscretion as the final piece of a carefully constructed puzzle. On a warm Friday evening, Eleanor invited Jenny to dinner, explaining that Dale was at a business conference in Houston. As they sat on the terrace, sipping white wine, and watching the sunset color the sky in shades of pink and orange, Eleanor held out her daughter's phone. "I think you need to see this," she said quietly as Jenny flipped through the messages, her expression changing from confusion to hurt and anger. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Jenny finally said, tears streaming down her face. "I had no idea he was doing this to you." Eleanor took her daughter's hands. "Honey, I'm not showing you these because I'm hurt. I'm showing them to you because you deserve to know who you married." That night, as Jenny slept in her old bedroom, Eleanor made another decision. She called her attorney and drew up the divorce papers she had been preparing for months. Then she called Dale. "I know about the money you've been siphoning from the company," she said calmly when he answered. "I know about the account in the Caymans, and I know about Melissa in accounting." Dale's stunned silence confirmed what Eleanor had discovered during her careful preparation. "I'm not going to expose you," she continued, "but I am leaving you. The papers will be delivered on Monday. I'm taking what is rightfully mine half of the company that was built on my family's lands and connections. Jenny knows about Tom's inappropriate behavior toward me. How you behave with your protege is your business." 2 months later, Eleanor sat on the terrace of her lakeside cottage watching the sunset with Jenny, who had also filed for divorce. Dale was forced to accept Eleanor's terms when confronted with evidence of his financial fraud. Tom was fired from Winters Construction after Jenny showed her father the text messages. "I never thought I'd have to start over at 60, Eleanor reflected as she sipped her tea. "But I've never felt more alive." Jenny smiled at her mother. "You've taught me something important, Mother. It's never too late to stand in your own light." Eleanor nodded, thinking about the thriving consulting business, the freedom she felt waking up every morning and not having to answer to anyone, and the peace that came when she finally became true to herself. "Some men think women our age are desperate for attention," she told her daughter. "They don't expect us to author our own stories." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lake, Eleanor felt no regret. Only the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows and found her own power. At 60, she wasn't just catching the attention of customers at the grocery store, she was turning the page of the truest chapter of her life. The next morning, Eleanor received a message from Dale. "The board of directors wants you back as a consultant. Without your connections, the Henderson project will fall apart." Eleanor smiled as she typed a reply. "My consulting fee is $250 per hour. Minimum fee is 20 hours. My assistant will send a contract." She paused, then added, "And Dale? I prefer to be addressed as Ms. Winters now." She put the phone away and stepped out onto the terrace, breathing in the fresh morning air. The lake glistened in the early sunlight, promising another beautiful day. Eleanor stretched, feeling a pleasant pull in her muscles after yesterday's yoga class. At 60, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Later in the afternoon, as Eleanor was reviewing contracts for a new client, the phone rang. It was Jenny. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Tom's mother called me." Eleanor tensed. Barbara Caldwell had always been Dale's biggest fan, constantly singing dithyrambs to him and advising Jenny to be more accommodating like Eleanor. "What did she want?" asked Eleanor warily. "To apologize," replied Jenny, as surprised as Eleanor. She said she'd known about Tom's behavior for years. Apparently he did something similar in his first marriage. She said she should have warned me, but she was trying to protect him. Jenny paused. "She also said she always admired the way you carried yourself with dignity, even when Dale, well, was Dale." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, contemplating this unexpected alliance. Barbara Caldwell, the mother of her former sister-in-law, saw more than Eleanor thought she should. "She asked if we could have lunch next week," Jenny continued. "She said she was filing for divorce, too. 42 years of marriage, and she's finally had enough of Father Tom's behavior." Eleanor smiled. "Tell her I'd be happy to recommend my attorney." As she hung up the phone, Eleanor thought about the quiet revolution taking place among the women of her circle. The masks they had worn for decades were slipping away, revealing the strong, determined women who had always existed beneath the surface. In her 60s, Eleanor hadn't expected to be an inspiration to others. But as she looked out over the lake and watched the wind create ripples on its surface, she realized that sometimes the most powerful statements are made not by grand gestures, but by the simple act of finally choosing herself.